So actually before the party, Sion already knew that his wife Hicho could talk. He came to the 70th birthday celebration of Chairman Chung-won while thinking about what had really happened, until he heard that his mother-in-law was scolding Hicho. Sion waited for his mother-in-law to finish and then asked why Hicho could not talk. Hicho's mother reminded her son-in-law that Hicho had experienced shock after an accident, and maybe even now she still felt guilty about the accident in which her brother died and her sister became deaf. Sion was confused about why Hicho felt guilty when the accident wasn't her fault. There, Sion also warned his mother-in-law slightly to watch her behavior and not say strange things about Hicho because Hicho was his wife. After that, Sion receives a call from the kidnapper, who is actually Hicho herself. While receiving the call, Sion saw his wife's coat, which the servant said had been left in the restroom. He then followed Hicho to the rooftop and saw her on the phone there. Startled, Hicho panicked and fell, but Sion quickly catch his wife. Sion immediately got angry because Hicho had been standing on a chair as if she wanted to kill herself. Hearing Sion so angry at her, Hicho suddenly hiccuped and a small sound automatically came out of her mouth. Sion remembered that when he arrived at the rooftop, he had seen Hicho on the phone even though he thought his wife couldn't speak. Sion forced Hicho to make a sound again because he was curious if what he had heard was his wife's voice. However, suddenly he received a call from his subordinates. Because of that, Sion immediately told his wife to go inside while helping her put on her coat. The event ended and Sion and Hijo returned home. At home, Sion noticed a scar from a dog bite on Hijo's leg from when they were young. Sion was curious about how Hijo had endured the pain of the bite without screaming at all back then when they were young. Hijo had been upset and left the house after being scolded by her mother for wanting to become a host, even though she wasn't allowed to talk. While outside, she encountered a dog that suddenly bit her. Luckily, Sion quickly came to help Hijo and carried her to the hospital. That night, Sion and Hijo couldn't sleep. Sion kept thinking and wanted to ask Hijo's muteness but decided against it. Meanwhile, Hijo was also thinking about Sion's word about her and wondered if Sion really cared about her all this time. The next day, Hijo receives news that she had been accepted and passed to become a sign language interpreter at the presidential office. She wanted to share this news with Sion, but since she didn't know what to say, she sent him a heart eyes emoji instead. Sion, who was in the meeting at his office at the time, was immediately confused because he had never seen a romantic or love theme emoji like this before. During the meeting, Sion became distracted and wondered what he should ask his wife. Should he ask her the meaning behind the emoji or not? Sion decided to just congratulate her for successfully getting accepted. Hicho, who had intentionally been worried about Sion's reaction and response, was relieved because Sion didn't get angry. She then replied, saying she would treat her husband to dinner. Sion then planned to give a gift to his wife. He sent her the address of a boutique and wanted Hijo to go there after work. When Hijo arrived at the boutique, it turned out Sion had already picked out a dress for her. Without Hicho knowing, her sister, Hong Inna, was also there, trying on some clothes. Beside work clothes, Sion also wanted to buy an evening gown for his wife, but Hicho refused because she thought the gown wasn't suitable for her. Sion then asked Hicho to try another gown that suited her better. Sion pointed to a dress, and when Hijo tried it on, Sion was captivated by how beautiful his wife looked. Sion hoped that Hijo could stop hiding herself and underestimating herself. Without Sion or Hijo realizing it, Ina was watching the two of them from afar. She got really jealous. After shopping, Hijo planned to treat Sion to dinner, but suddenly Hijo receives a message from Sungwoo and Yuri saying they wanted to treat Hijo to dinner and congratulate her for becoming a sign language interpreter at the presidential office. Sion allowed Hijo to go with them as long as he could join. That night, the four of them ate together again. Sungwoo, of course, questioned why Hijo and Sion were together. Sion explained that night Hijo had actually planned to treat him to dinner. Sungwoo found it strange why Hijo suddenly wanted to treat Sion to dinner. He thought there must be something going on. Sungwoo also asked why Hijo was now part of the sign language interpreter team at the presidential office when her real dream was to become a host. Soyeon became confused as to why Songwoo was even bringing up Hijo's dream, as Hijo was already working as a sign language interpreter. Soyeon feared that this might affect Hijo and make her feel uncertain. But also deep down he was jealous that why this man knows more about his wife than him. Hijo, with her hand movement, immediately told Soyeon and Songwoo to stop arguing. Hijo explained that while being a host was indeed her dream, she was also happy working as a sign language interpreter, and there was no need to argue about it. Afterward, Hijo went outside for some fresh air. Suddenly, she receives a message from Inas asking about her well-being out of concern. Sion then followed Hijo outside. At that moment, Sion saw two young siblings passing in front of him, which reminded him of his childhood. When Sion was young, he often went to Inna and Hijo's house to study together. Inna, who was deaf, couldn't hear what Sion said, as Hijo always translated for her. Even though Inna, as a wealthy person, could have bought a hearing aid or learned sign language like Hijo, it seemed as though Hijo became her servant, always having to be by her side. Sion's thoughts were interrupted when he received a call from the kidnapper, who was actually his wife, Hijo. Since Sion was on the phone with the kidnapper, he asked if the kidnapper had ever heard Hijo's voice or knew why Hijo couldn't talk. Sion then recalled his mother-in-law's words that perhaps Hijo's guilt was so immense that she didn't want to speak. Was his wife unable to speak because of her sister Inna? The accident had caused Hung Inna, the biological daughter of Chairman Hung, to become deaf. As a result, Hijo had been forced to remain silent. The kidnapper, who was Hicho, refused to explain this. He only asked if Sion truly didn't want to let go of Hicho. Sion wanted to express his true feeling to the kidnapper, who was actually Hicho. However, as he was crossing the street, a car suddenly sped towards him. Hicho, who was on the other side of the street, immediately screamed, calling out her husband's name and saving him. Luckily, both of them were unharmed. Although Hijo's hand was slightly injured, Sion then warned Hijo to be more careful because her hands were crucial for her work. At that moment, Sion remembered that Hijo had just called his name earlier. He wanted Hijo to call him again. Sion wanted to hear his wife's voice again. He wanted her to speak and say everything she had been holding back all this time. At home, Hijo received a call from the real kidnapper. The kidnapper laughed, saying they had seen Hicho saving Sion. It turned out that the car was nearly hit Sion was driven by the real kidnapper. The kidnapper was no longer sure if Hicho truly wanted to separate from Sion, as it seemed she still cared deeply for him. In the end, Hicho officially started her job at the presidential spokesperson's office. After getting to know the entire staff, Hicho invited Sion to learn sign language. Little by little, Sion mastered each word well, all thanks to Hicho. Finally, the two of them could communicate well, even if it was just through sign language and eye contact. That evening, the spokesperson's office held a welcome dinner for new sign language interpreters. The night was enjoyable until Sion was called outside by his subordinates, who reported that they have analyzed the original voice and confirmed it was from a woman. Sion couldn't believe it. All the time, the person who had been threatening him was a woman. He remembered that how the kidnapper knew about Hicho and always seemed to be nearby. He also remembered catching Hicho on the phone before. Was it truly the Hicho? Was it true that Hicho was the kidnapper all along? To confirm, Sion sent an audio recording of the woman's voice to his subordinates to match it. Distracted by these thoughts, Sion ended up drinking heavily and got drunk. He had to be driven home by a substitute driver, while Hicho took a taxi to avoid being noticed by her colleagues. When Hicho arrived home, she found Sion still in the car, asleep. She tried to carry him inside, but the two of them stumbled and fell. In the process, their lips accidentally landed on each other's, and almost a kiss. When Sion opens his eyes, he sees Hicho leaving him stunned. The episode ends